At 8:15 local time, the Barents Sea, 230 nautical miles northeast of the Norwegian coast, is performing its November impression of a body of water that has decided accessibility is not a priority. The sky is the color of unfinished concrete. The sea state is 4 significant swells from the northwest, each approximately 2.5 meters, arriving at intervals that the P-8A Poseidon, at 200 feet above the wavetops, experiences as a physical fact rather than a meteorological statistic. The surface temperature is 3 degrees Celsius. The water beneath the surface is colder and quieter and more complicated, and contains within its 700-meter average depth a thermal and salinity structure that acoustic engineers have been modeling for 5 decades and that still produces, on any given day in November, surprises that the models did not anticipate. The Barents Sea is not the Mediterranean. It is not the Red Sea. It is not a venue for the casual exercise of anti-submarine warfare capability. It is the most operationally demanding acoustic environment in which U.S. Navy maritime patrol aviation operates. And the crew of this P-8A has been operating in it for 6 hours and 47 minutes and has found exactly nothing. This is not reassuring. Finding nothing in the Barents Sea when a Yasen-class nuclear-powered attack submarine is assessed to be operating in this area is not evidence that the assessment is wrong. Finding nothing in the Barents Sea is the expected result of searching for a Yasen-class nuclear-powered attack submarine, because the Yasen-class was specifically designed to be what you find when the Barents Sea has finished hiding it, which is to say, late and reluctantly, the Yasen-class. This requires a specific kind of introduction that other platforms in this channel's inventory do not, because the Yasen-class is not an instrument of comedy, and this channel does not treat it as one. The Project 885, Yasen-class nuclear-powered attack submarine, is what the Russian Submarine Design Bureau produced after the Soviet Union ended, after the fleet funding collapsed, after the years of dry dock and delayed commissioning and programs suspended mid-build. It is what emerges when you take the accumulated expertise of one of the world's great submarine design traditions, constrain it for 2 decades by budget realities that would have ended a lesser program, and then find enough funding to finish it properly. The first hull commissioned in 2014. Subsequent hulls have followed at intervals that reflect the difficulty of building nuclear submarines in a constrained industrial environment, but they have followed. The Yasen carries 32 cruise missiles and can fire them from vertical launch tubes while submerged. It carries torpedoes. Its anechoic tile coating, the rubber acoustic dampening material applied to its outer hull, is assessed by Western analysts as among the best in current service. Its reactor plant produces less acoustic output than its predecessors. It is quiet in ways that the Barents Sea is specifically designed to exploit, and it operates in the Barents Sea with the tactical advantage of a platform operating in its home waters against a threat that has been trying to track it for 6 hours and 47 minutes and has found nothing. This is the starting point, not a joke. A genuine operational challenge that the P-8A crew has been working since 128 when the datum was established, and that the Barents Sea has been complicating since the moment the first sonobuoy entered the water. The datum had come from a different platform, a Los Angeles-class attack submarine operating in the eastern Barents, assigned to the barrier line that tracks Russian submarine departures from the Kola bases. At 1:14, the Los Angeles had acquired a brief contact on its passive sonar, a broadband transient consistent with a mechanical event aboard a large nuclear submarine. Specifically, consistent with the startup sequence of a pump system that produces a characteristic signature at the moment of initiation and then disappears into the background as steady-state operation takes over. 11 seconds. The Los Angeles had attempted to classify and track the contact. The contact had not cooperated. The Barents Sea's acoustic environment, convergence zones at distances that the source-to-sensor geometry had not favored, background noise from a distant Arctic weather system, the specific thermal layering of November in the eastern Barents, had conspired to produce 11 seconds of data, and then silence. The Los Angeles had transmitted the datum at 1:18. The P-8A had been diverted from its standard patrol track at 1:24. It had reached the datum area at 1:51 and had been working it since. 6 hours and 51 minutes of working a datum in the Barents Sea. 6 hours and 51 minutes of sonobuoys, of acoustic processor time, of the specific patience that anti-submarine warfare in this environment demands from crews that have trained for it and that still find it, on the actual day, more demanding than the training communicated. The crew of 8 was divided between the 2 pilots, managing the aircraft's fuel state, and navigation in the Barents Sea's weather, the acoustic operators working the processor displays in the aft section. The tactical coordinator managing the overall prosecution picture, and the electronic support measures operator monitoring the electromagnetic environment for any emission that the Yasen's systems might produce. The ESM operator had been monitoring for 6 hours and 51 minutes and had produced the same result as everyone else. Nothing. The Yasen-class operates under strict emissions control. Its periscope radar is not used casually. Its communications are managed at the command level, not the crew level, and the command level of Russian submarine operations has been thinking about MCON since before most of the current crew was born. Here is the vulnerability that the Yasen's commanding officer had been managing for 6 hours and that at 8:15 was becoming a calculation rather than a policy. The Yasen-class reactor plant requires, at regular intervals, a cooling system adjustment that produces a transient acoustic event, not a large event, not an event that is detectable at significant range in the Barents Sea's background noise levels, but an event that, at close range, within approximately 4 nautical miles, produces a broadband signature that the P-8A's sonobuoy acoustic processors are specifically configured to detect, because the signature was characterized from the first Yasen hull during a 2018 collection event that the acoustic library has been refining since. The adjustment interval is not fixed. It depends on reactor power level, operating depth, and thermal conditions, but it occurs on average every 4 to 7 hours of sustained operation at cruise speed. The Yasen had been at cruise speed since approximately 1 o'clock. It was now 8:15. 7 hours and 15 minutes. The adjustment window was open. The P-8A's tactical coordinator knew this. It was in the mission brief. It was the reason the crew had been maintaining its prosecution with the patience that 6 hours and 51 minutes of empty acoustic processor displays requires of human beings, because the empty displays were not evidence of failure. They were evidence that the target was where it was supposed to be and was doing what it was supposed to do. And the question was not whether the reactor adjustment would occur, but whether the P-8A would have a sonobuoy within 4 nautical miles of the Yasen when it did. This is the operational challenge. The datum from the Los Angeles had placed the Yasen's position at 1:14 with the positional uncertainty of an 11-second broadband transient, a circle of approximately 60 nautical miles around the estimated position, accounting for the time elapsed and the Yasen's maximum speed, 60 nautical miles of search area. The P-8A's prosecution had been narrowing that circle for 6 hours and 51 minutes using the absence of contact as information. eliminating sectors where the Yasen was not, based on the buoy pattern's acoustic coverage and the speeds at which the submarine could have transited each sector. The circle was now approximately 12 nautical miles in radius, 12 nautical miles of most probable area, with 12 sonobuoys currently in the water distributed across the most probable sectors, and the reactor adjustment window open. At 8:23, buoy 7 produced a contact, not the reactor adjustment, something smaller, a narrowband tonal at 63 Hz, consistent with a machinery component operating at a specific rotational speed. Faint. The acoustic operator had been watching this frequency band since 600 hours, when the previous buoy pattern had produced a possible contact that had degraded as the buoy aged and could not be confirmed. This was not that contact. This was at a different bearing. This was on a buoy that had been in the water for 11 minutes and had not yet begun to degrade. The tonal was real, and it was consistent with the acoustic library's entry for Yasen-class auxiliary machinery in one specific configuration, and the operator called it to the tactical coordinator with the restraint of someone who has been waiting for 7 hours and does not want to be wrong. Possible contact, buoy 7, narrowband tonal, 63 Hz, bearing 240 from the buoy. Confidence? Possible. Possible. The tactical coordinator looked at the buoy's position, the bearing, the frequency. He ran the geometry against the current position estimate. The bearing from buoy 7 was consistent with the most probable sector, the sector that 6 hours of elimination had left as the remaining candidate area. He reached for the intercom. Pilots, come right to 060. I need a drop point 3 miles ahead of the buoy 7 contact bearing. The P-8A banked right. The mission commander, in the front seat, had the fuel state on his primary display. The aircraft had been airborne for 6 hours and 51 minutes. The Barents Sea's weather, 3-degree ambient temperature, significant wave height limiting effective sonobuoy depth range up. The wind that had been building from the northwest since 6 o'clock was consuming fuel at rates that the pre-mission planning had not precisely anticipated. The fuel state was adequate. It was adequate in the specific sense that adequate means sufficient with margin, and the margin was approximately 90 minutes of additional prosecution before the aircraft needed to begin its transit to the tanker that the mission plan had positioned 300 miles southwest. 90 minutes. The reactor adjustment window had been open for 7 hours and 15 minutes. If the adjustment occurred within the next 90 minutes, the prosecution had a chance. If the adjustment occurred after the P-8A had departed for the tanker, the contact would degrade, the buoy pattern would age, and the Yasen would disappear back into the Barents Sea for whatever interval it chose before the next event. The acoustic coordinator was briefing the new drop point to the operators as the aircraft banked. 2 buoys. Drop them 3 miles ahead of the bearing from buoy 7, offset by 1 mile to provide triangulation. Enter the water within the next 4 minutes. At 8:27, the first buoy entered the water. At 8:28, the second. Both buoys reported acoustic environment data within 60 seconds. The acoustic operators integrated the new buoys into the picture with the focused efficiency of people who have been doing this for 6 hours and 51 minutes and have developed in that time a specific relationship with the acoustic processor, displays that is somewhere between familiarity and something the training curriculum does not have a precise word for. At 8:31, the reactor adjustment occurred. It produced on buoys 7, 9, and the 2 newly deployed buoys a broadband transient of approximately 4-second duration, centered on a frequency band that the acoustic library entry for Yasen-class reactor cooling system adjustments described with the specificity of a primary data entry based on the 2018 collection event. The transient was faint on buoy 7, where it had originally been, and clearer on the two new buoys, which were closer. The acoustic operator on the starboard display had the cross-correlation running before the transient finished. The position solution was building from 3 bearing lines: reactor transient, cross-correlated on buoys 7, new alpha, new bravo, position solution building, confidence, high, high. From 4 seconds of reactor adjustment acoustic signature, cross-correlated on 3 buoys, 7 hours and 33 minutes after the datum was established, 230 nautical miles from the Norwegian coast in the Barents Sea in November. The tactical coordinator looked at the position solution. The Yasen was at approximately 22 nautical miles from the P-8A's current position, bearing 195, depth estimated at 240 meters, course assessed west-northwest, speed assessed at 5 knots, west-northwest. The Yasen was heading west, toward the Norwegian Sea approaches. The mission brief had identified this as the assessed operational intent: a transit toward the GIUK gap, the Greenland-Iceland-United Kingdom passage, that is the choke point between the North Atlantic and the Norwegian Sea, and that NATO's anti-submarine architecture has been designed around since the Cold War. The assessment was now confirmed by a position and course. The Yasen was where the assessment said it would be, doing what the assessment said it would do. Contact confirmed. Transmitting to 5th Fleet and Submarine. The tactical coordinator's voice was the voice of someone who has been waiting for 7 hours and 33 minutes and has just received confirmation that the waiting was correct. Now, the intelligence product from 7 hours and 33 minutes of prosecution in the Barents Sea and the 4 seconds of reactor adjustment that had resolved it. The acoustic library entry for the Yasen-class reactor cooling adjustment had 3 prior data points: the 2018 collection from the first hull at range and under acoustic conditions that had produced a characterization rated as probable, a 2021 collection from a different hull, shorter duration, lower confidence, and a 2023 collection from a Norwegian P-3 Orion that had acquired the signature at significant range and that the library had incorporated with a quality notation indicating supplementary rather than primary data. This morning's collection, 4 seconds, cross-correlated on 3 buoys at ranges that provided the signal quality the previous collections had not achieved, was the first primary grade characterization of the reactor adjustment signature from this specific hull. The hull identification from the depth profile, the acoustic characteristics, and the positioning data was consistent with the 3rd Yasen hull. Not the first, not the second, but the 3rd, which had commissioned in 2021 and had a characterization file that was thinner than the earlier hulls because it had been in service for less time and had provided fewer collection opportunities. The characterization file for the 3rd hull was no longer thin. "What's the quality assessment on the transient?" the mission commander asked from the front seat. "Primary data, sir. 3 buoys, clean cross-correlation. The frequency band is consistent with the 2018 entry, but the specific harmonic pattern is different from the first hull's entry. This is a different reactor plant configuration, probably a modification from the first hull's design." The acoustic coordinator paused. "Sublant is going to want to look at this." "Sublant's already getting it. Transmit the raw data." The raw acoustic data, the 4-second transient, the 3 buoy recording, the cross-correlation product, and the position solution was transmitted to the appropriate recipients at 8:34. The transmission reached the P-3 Coordination Center at Keflavik, Sublant's acoustic intelligence cell at Norfolk, and the relevant NATO Maritime Command within 12 minutes. The Yasen's position, course, speed, and depth were now known at 4 organizational levels simultaneously, and the information was being acted on. The acting on it involved a Los Angeles-class submarine, receiving an updated contact report that placed the Yasen 22 nautical miles at bearing 195 from the P-8A's position and moving west-northwest. The Los Angeles was not at that position. The Los Angeles would need to reposition to establish contact on the Yasen's assessed track. The repositioning would take time. The P-8A had approximately 80 minutes of fuel remaining before the tanker transit. The geometry was workable in the specific sense that geometry is workable when the numbers are close and the participants are professional. At 8:39, the P-8A dropped 4 additional sonobuoys along the Yasen's assessed track, extending the coverage ahead of the contact's projected position. 2 buoys acquired a faint contact consistent with the submarine's propulsion at 8:44. The position solution updated. The Yasen was moving as assessed. The prosecution was maintaining contact. Not the crisp, confident contact of a target that is close and cooperative, but the kind of contact that the Barents Sea produces when you have found something that is trying very hard not to be found, which is a degraded contact that is nonetheless a contact, and a contact that is being maintained rather than lost. The fuel state reached the tanker transit threshold at 9:47. The tactical coordinator made the call at 9:45, 2 minutes before the hard limit, because 2 minutes of margin is how professionals operate. Sublant, Avenger 7. We are approaching fuel threshold. Transmitting current prosecution picture for transition. Los Angeles has the contact. We are proceeding to tanker. The Los Angeles had the contact. The underwater picture had been passed. The prosecution continued below the surface without the P-8A, with a platform that did not have a fuel state and did not have a weather constraint and did not have a tanker transit threshold. The Los Angeles had been repositioning since 0834 and had been working toward the Yasen's position with the patience of a nuclear submarine that has all the time that its reactor provides. On the P-8A, turning southwest toward the tanker, at 0945, the acoustic coordinator completed the collection log. The log was 11 pages. 11 pages to describe 7 hours and 33 minutes of prosecution in the Barents Sea, culminating in 4 seconds of reactor adjustment signature that had resolved a 60 nautical mile search circle into a position solution accurate to approximately 2 nautical miles. The 11 pages included the position, course, speed, and depth of a Yasen-class nuclear submarine transiting toward the GIUK gap. They included the reactor cooling adjustment characterization, primary data, first from this hull, harmonic pattern distinct from hull 1. They included the 6-hour patrol track that had eliminated everything in the datum area except the most probable sector. And they included the assessment. The tactical coordinator's assessment, which the mission commander had approved and transmitted, that the Yasen's course was consistent with a GIUK gap transit, and that Sublant should plan for the contact to be in the Norwegian Sea within approximately 48 hours. The tanker was at its planned position. The fuel transfer took 16 minutes. The P-8A turned back northeast. The Barents Sea was still gray, still cold, still completely indifferent. The second prosecution sortie began at 10:47. The Los Angeles had maintained contact throughout. Russian state media had not reported anything about submarine operations in the Barents Sea, because Russian state media does not report about submarine operations in the Barents Sea. Submarine operations are sensitive. The operational security of the Northern Fleet submarine movement is, by design, better than most elements of the Russian military's operational security. Because submarine forces are the element of the Russian military that takes operational security most seriously, and the Northern Fleet's submarine element takes it most seriously of all, and the Yasen-class takes it most seriously within that. The crew was operating under emissions controls so strict that the ESM operator on the P-8A had recorded nothing for 7 hours and 33 minutes. The acoustic signature of the reactor adjustment, the 4 seconds that had resolved everything, was not a communications choice. It was a physical characteristic of the machinery. It was unavoidable. The acoustic library had been waiting for it since the mission brief. The precision of what it produced, primary data, hull-specific characterization, positioned to 2 nautical miles, was the product of 7 hours of patience and 4 seconds of physics that the Yasen's commanding officer could not have prevented, regardless of what he chose to do. This is what anti-submarine warfare looks like when both sides are professional. The Yasen had been quiet for 7 hours and 33 minutes. The P-8A had been patient for 7 hours and 33 minutes. The reactor had been honest for 4 seconds. 4 seconds was enough. The GIUK gap monitoring architecture was updated at 0912 with the contact's course and speed. The appropriate assets were being positioned. The Barents Sea had produced one of its reluctant contacts, and the contact was now being handed from asset to asset with the professional coordination of a NATO architecture that has been designed for exactly this scenario since the Cold War and has not stopped designing it since. The Yasen is genuinely capable. 7 hours and 33 minutes said so. 4 seconds said something else.
Bye for now.